Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Landy. I'm the director of Collegium, which is a membership organization of 62 Catholic U.S. and Canadian Catholic colleges and universities. It was founded in 1992. Our purpose is to help faculty at Catholic colleges and universities to better understand the mission of Catholic higher education and to invite them to help prepare them to become leaders in advancing that mission in really creative ways. We've traditionally been known for doing that work through week-long summer colloquies on faith and intellectual life, where faculty of all religious backgrounds and disciplines come together to learn about the legacy, the priorities of Catholic higher education, to think about their vocations as teachers and scholars, and to discern how their commitments and talents can enhance the mission of Catholic higher education. In COVID time, we've been expanding our outreach, and I'm delighted to do that today, both for our Collegium alums and for those of you who are new to Collegium, whether through Father Kollman, who I'll introduce in a moment, or through some of the others who are here. So I'm glad to see a whole group of people from a spectrum of different experiences. I want to welcome you to a talk by Father Paul Kollman, CSC of the University of Notre Dame. The talk is entitled, Go Out to All the World, Catholic Higher Education in a Global Context. And what we're doing today is not only a chance for you to learn something, but it's also a chance to workshop what will be, I gather, chapter 10 of a forthcoming volume on Catholic higher education in light of Catholic social thought, critical constructive essays. Bernard Prusak and Jennifer Reed-Booley are the editors of that. And I'm really grateful to Bernard and Jennifer for their leadership and for the chance to collaborate on this today. Those of you who know me know that in addition to directing Collegium, I have a day job as a significant part of that work, director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture at the College of the Holy Cross, no related to the CSC Holy Crosses. I've been engaged for about 6 or 7 years as leader of an initiative called Catholics and Cultures, a website with educational resources on Catholic life and practice around the world, in 30 countries in every region of the world. We also sponsor a journal of global Catholicism. You can see all of that at catholicsandcultures.org. I mention that because while my research has taken me all around the globe, including visits and talks at higher education institutions in the US, Africa, India, the Philippines, and Canada, I have a long-standing interest in the global church and the future of higher education, but have never really put the two of these parts of my life together. And there are a range of reasons for that, but it makes me especially grateful that Father Kollman's really begun to do that thinking, to nudge me and everyone else along to make the connections that we should be making in the larger world. Father Paul Kollman is Associate Professor in the Department of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. He's also a fellow in the Helen Kellogg Institute for International Studies, the Joan B. Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, the Nanovic Institute for European Studies, and the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion at Notre Dame. Previously, he served as director of Notre Dame's Center for Social Concerns. He's a trustee at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, and the University of Notre Dame, and on the University Council of Taganzo University in Nairobi, Kenya. He's past president of the American Society of Missiology and the current president of the International Association for Mission Studies. He's distinguished himself as a scholar with research that focuses on African Christianity, mission history, and world Christianity. And he's carried out research in Eastern Africa, Nigeria, and South Africa, as well as in archives in the US and Canada. Father Kollman will speak, and then I'll offer a few comments and try to keep mine at a minimum, and then we'll open those for discussion. I know there's a lot of expertise in the Zoom room we've got here, so I look forward to hearing back feedback that can help him deliver the first-rate final draft that I know he wants to present to editors, and I can promise you he is very far on the way to having that first-rate draft. I'll note that we are being recorded, and we'll post this online via YouTube. So note that if you do ask something online, you'll be, and I'll ask you to raise your hand when the time comes, you'll be on that recording. But if you do want to ask me a question or make a comment anonymously, you can private chat me to do that. So welcome, Father Paul Kollman.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thanks to all of you for coming. My presentation, as Tom mentioned, is a work in progress destined for an edited volume, edited by Bernard Prusak and Jennifer Reed-Booley. I thank those editors for inviting me to contribute to the volume. My chapter considers how Catholic social thought or Catholic social teaching, I'm going to refer to it as CST throughout my paper, relates to Catholic higher education from a global perspective. Since I anticipate revising this, I welcome comments and suggestions today, for I am certainly no expert on this topic, and I thank Tom Landy and Collegium for hosting this event. Tom first personally for responding to it, and all of you for being present. Having looked at the website he mentioned in his introductory remarks and the journal that he's helped found, I must say that he's done a remarkable amount of work making global Catholic realities present for those who want to understand them well. This paper will have 4 parts. First, I will offer a brief portrayal of global Catholic higher education, highlighting institutions' ranges and identifying trends in Catholic higher ed, especially its phenomenal growth in the majority world, by which I mean the so-called global south of Africa, much of Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. This will lead to the paper's second part, 3 anecdotes from Catholic higher ed outside the US chosen to raise issues the paper seeks to address. Third, the paper will discuss 3 challenges, I think, that hinder easy implementation of CST, Catholic social teaching, in a coherent way across Catholic global higher ed. These challenges include, first, the natural insularity of institutions everywhere that need to attend to the needs of their own viability. Second, an instinctive yet naive solidarity that moves into easy but unhelpful action just because they're shocked by inequalities across Catholic institutions. And third, the diversity of contexts in which universities operate so that CST principles aren't easily applied everywhere in the same way. If a theme of these challenges might be identified, it could be that solidarity, as Catholic social teaching defines it, means more than a desire to help another. The fourth part of the paper will identify opportunities for CST to advance Catholic global higher ed and offer suggestions thus to how to respond to these opportunities. Again, I'll make 3 suggestions. First, to take advantage of existing structures to foster healthier interdependence among Catholic universities along the lines of CST, especially the important and underutilized work of the International Federation of Catholic Universities. Second, recognize that Catholic higher ed in the US has real strengths in thinking about CST implementation that can be useful elsewhere, and vice versa, that global Catholic higher ed elsewhere has strengths to share with us. And third, discover new ways that constituent groups in global Catholic universities develop more lateral ties, administrators, faculty, and especially students, to consider purposeful ways of sharing CST-linked insights. If a single theme emerges, it is that solidarity among Catholic higher ed institutions must derive from mutual relationships forged by honest institutional awareness about achievements and obstacles to embracing CST internally. So, part 1. If you've been engaged in close consideration of Catholic higher ed, as I think most of you have been, you'll be especially familiar with its manifestations in the United States. Most of us live here, and Catholic colleges and universities in the US play a comparatively large role in the public life of the church in this country, as well as in national higher education landscapes. Yet US-based Catholic colleges and universities comprise less than 1/5 of the world's Catholic institutions of higher ed. By the count of the Vatican Congregation of Catholic Education, the US houses 244 of the 1,358 such bodies in the world. US Catholic colleges and universities educate about 850,000 students a year, while there are over 6.5 million students in Catholic education across the world. This makes Catholic higher ed the largest private university network in the world by institutions and number of students. And Catholic higher ed includes the largest range of types of institutions, from venerable medieval universities to the growing number of Catholic higher ed institutions around the world founded after Vatican II. The age of these institutions represent, of course, only one factor that differentiates them. Other differences include the nature of their affiliation with the church, the scope of the education they offer, from technical education to teachers training to comprehensive research universities. as well as the resources at their disposal and their reputation within their national and regional settings. The oldest of these universities maintain their Catholic identity in one form or another, that maintain their Catholic identity in one form or another, began with a strong focus on theology and philosophy, and many remain pontifical. Most Catholic colleges and universities in the US, on the contrary, began more locally. They usually were linked to founding religious congregations, or in some cases, the diocese in which they're located, and developed so that their formal ties with the church took place through these congregations or dioceses. A global perspective identifies certain recent trends in global Catholic higher ed. One such trend is that traditionally Catholic universities are shedding their Catholic identity. And this is occurring especially in Europe, in places like Nijmegen, now called Radboud University, without its earlier Catholic modifier. A second trend is that some new Catholic universities have arisen in the West or the global North or the minority world, organized around ideological coherence. These have been usually financed by more conservative-leaning Catholics. Third, and most important, I think, is the simple explosion of Catholic universities in the world, beginning after Vatican II and rapidly expanding since 1990. And this parallels the growth of higher education generally everywhere. Most of these newer universities have some combination of three types of origins. First, there are those that began as Catholic seminaries or institutes of theological education with regional origins. And they've now evolved toward university status. Thus, we have former seminaries. Second, there are a few institutions that emerged with a very self-conscious support of bishops as new entities, the result of such bishops working collaboratively within a country or a region. I'm familiar with, for instance, the Catholic Institute of West Africa in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and the Catholic University of East Africa in Nairobi. And there are analogs in Francophone West and Central Africa. These are, I would call, collaborative projects with hierarchical support. Third, there are those more like the common pattern in the US, linked to the ambitions of a diocese, a religious congregation, or in some cases, a particular Catholic individual or group. These independent Catholic universities, a term I've chosen simply to differentiate them from the first two types, represent the lion's share of newer Catholic institutions of higher education, thus in some ways repeating the US pattern elsewhere. Turning now to this second part of the paper, I want to offer a few anecdotes about recently established Catholic universities. These are true stories, as far as I know, though I have changed the details so not to harm the innocent. First anecdote. A recently founded Catholic university in a largely non-Christian country has been underway a few years. Enrollment has been solid. The bigger challenge is leadership. The founding International Catholic Religious Order has provided key leaders from the university's beginning, many being religious who'd worked in higher ed in the West. Now the challenge lies in finding the right combination of leaders from native-born members of the religious community within the country, as well as others from within the country who are likely to be non-Christian. One telling moment occurred when the expatriate Catholic religious who'd served as chief inspector of exams sought to replace herself. She had found a native-born academic within the university with an impeccable reputation for integrity, and this person had agreed to serve. Yet when the change was introduced, native colleagues privately told the outgoing chief exam inspector, if your replacement isn't and here inserting a word mostly used for European origin outsiders with slightly negative connotations, nearly every language of the once colonized has such a term. If your replacement isn't another foreigner, no one will trust the integrity of our exams and our degrees. Second anecdote. Another Catholic university in the global South began as a seminary organized by a number of international Catholic religious orders. That work continues. It's still a seminary, yet it also now houses other institutes and centers of a specialized sort. All began focusing on training members of these founding congregations, but they've now welcomed lay people from the surrounding area. One of these centers trains students in pastoral care and counseling, and its degrees have been conferred in the past by a university in the global West, linked to the religious order that helped establish the center. Now this budding Catholic university faces pressure from the country in which it's located to take more direct control of all constituent colleges and centers if they're to remain part of the university moving forward. The problem arises that the congregation that founded the Pastoral Training Center does not want to relinquish control to the larger university structure. In fact, they threaten to take the center and its personnel, faculty, students, labs, library resources, to another site to establish their own independent center. This will represent a loss for this still new Catholic university whose reputation has developed by drawing strong lay students to campus for training like this. Third anecdote. Soon after Vatican II, Catholic leaders in a Western country without a Catholic university decided to start an institute for theological education designed for lay people. This institute flourished, eventually offering undergraduate and graduate degrees in formal theological subjects like theology, counseling, canon law, and Christian leadership. Beginning in the 1980s, tensions with some of the country's bishops emerged. Yet this institute remained independent with a board of laity, clergy, and religious. After the millennium, tensions with the bishops grew, and by the early 2010s, there were serious disagreements. Eventually, the Institute's longtime director regretfully concluded that the Institute couldn't maintain its identity if the bishops assumed the tighter control over it that a number of them wanted. That director foresaw a future in which a one-time Catholic Institute of Higher Education became an Institute of Higher Education run by Catholics. This linguistic change being a choice for independence that the director wanted to avoid, but he came to feel it was unavoidable. The distinction he sought was rejected by a very divided board, and the Institute now has bishops on its board and the director is gone. So let me just kind of put those out there. Replacing the exam inspector, the religious congregation wants to remove its unit, and the bishops want more control over this institution which resists. Turning to the third part of the paper, then, these anecdotes were chosen with the goal of gesturing towards some of the challenges of thinking with CST in Catholic higher ed globally. Each anecdote, oversimplified here, touches upon issues widely shared in higher ed, Catholic or not, finding and preparing leaders who generate trust and to facilitate such leadership transitions, guiding institutional evolution as previous structures become unsustainable due to outside pressures, tensions between universities and accrediting authorities, in this case, bishops. Yet these anecdotes also feature context-specific aspects linked to Catholic identity and other contextual factors that newer Catholic institutions face. These include post-colonial insecurity around perceptions of integrity linked to visible race in the first case. In the second, a sticking point is distinctly Catholic since it involves roles played by religious congregations that are part of larger institutions. The third raises the possibility of Catholic lay leaders in higher ed defying Catholic hierarchy, with both sides, hierarchy and laity, likely arguing that they strive to protect institutional integrity. To identify a first challenge, then, means to admit that applying CST to institutions anywhere is difficult, despite the commitment we might have to CST principles in the abstract. The US-based Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, ACC&U, with which Collegium is linked, has a number of tools by which member institutions can assess their Catholic identity, and many highlight principles of CST no one would likely deny in the abstract. That said, the pressing needs of every institution to protect itself, to advance its mission, mean that all face challenges in applying CST. And thus thinking about CST as collectively is even more difficult. The natural insularity of institutions means they attend to their own pressing needs as defined and discovered through proper institutional self-awareness. All sorts of forces conspire these days to make many Catholic colleges and universities everywhere vulnerable. And this was true before COVID. The other articles in the book will make that case clearly. It's hard enough to apply CST to practices internally, and the anecdotes suggest that it's harder still to think about it across global higher ed. A second challenge arises from an instinctive but misguided impulse to aid Catholic universities elsewhere unhelpfully, motivated by the obvious immense gulf in resources between some Catholic universities in the global north, like my own, and others, many of them in the global south. To visit newer Catholic universities in Africa, as well as probably in Latin American parts of Asia, is to encounter many institutions that lack resources in infrastructure, books and other media, information technology, faculty and administrative expertise, as well as money, common in the better secondary schools in the global West. In light of the solidarity so central to CST, it can be easy to think that yawning inequalities invite Catholic universities to share their wealth. Without dampening that necessary and laudatory impulse, it's important to move beyond using CST as simply a blunt instrument to share more. In light of that, I want to just note that development theorists often talk about bad buys. That is, development strategies that don't generate outcomes effectively, even when well-intentioned, even when they're expensive. Given the inequalities that exist, it's easy to see a number of bad buys as well-intentioned Catholic higher ed bodies in the North seek to respond to the few resources of those in the South. One thinks of books, buildings, computers, even cash transfers as potential bad buys. Books sent overseas are often outdated. Buildings produced without local knowledge are often expensive and ill-suited to local conditions. Computers are expensive to maintain and replace. Cash transfers are difficult to use effectively and generally offer only short-term relief. A third challenge arises from the diversity of contexts in which universities operate, so that CST principles don't apply everywhere in the same way. With regard to their links to the institutional church, it's true that a number of the newer Catholic universities in the global South resemble those in the US more than analogous institutions in Europe and Latin America, deriving from the efforts of individual religious congregations, dioceses, and even private individuals. That said, a number of instinctive responses regarding CST and Catholic higher ed in the US depend particularly on distinct features of higher ed and the church in the US. One thinks, for example, of the four-year expectation for degree completion, the large role of private benefaction, the broader acceptance of religious freedom in our culture, a surplus of qualified secondary school graduates, including many from numerous Catholic schools, and economic growth that creates ample career prospects for university graduates. These have been typical features of the US Catholic higher ed landscape for generations, comparatively speaking, in a global perspective. Many new Catholic universities elsewhere have no history of private benefaction, or very little, restricted freedom of religion, struggling secondary education, and narrow job prospects for university graduates compared to the US. It's the case, therefore, that many of the issues that CST-minded folks bring to bear on Catholic higher ed in the US have limited transferability. These include, for example, the importance of the core curriculum for shaping Catholic identity and CST. Most universities elsewhere move students more quickly into majors and expect core curriculum-like preparation in advanced secondary school. And universities typically provide undergraduates a 3-year course of study. Other US-specific concerns regarding CST and Catholic higher ed that resist easy transfer elsewhere include ethical concerns about investment and licensing practices. Catholic universities elsewhere usually lack endowments and brands to protect. The place of engaged and service learning within curricular offerings. These seem luxuries that can be ill afforded. And US-linked issues surrounding labor relations and employee compensation, which often reflect US economic realities and labor history. So, how do we deal with these challenges? I think these can be dealt with due to some opportunities that I want to discuss in this last part of the paper. These arise from existing realities and also habits of interdependence that we can further develop if we care about CST and Catholic higher ed more globally. The first opportunity lies in the existing structures already creating fruitful ties among Catholic universities. And a sizable number of these fruitful ties make reference to and depend on CST. Many of you will know that efforts at drawing together Catholic higher ed across the world have been long undertaken under Vatican direction. And the organization of Roman offices, ministries, and dicasteries for its oversight has changed over time. Meanwhile, Catholic universities themselves have self-consciously organized since at least the 1920s, when the Catholic University in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, and Milan's Catholic University of the Sacred Heart began to confer about a federation. The first meeting of potential participants took place in 1925 in Paris, with 14 Catholic universities represented. In 1948, the Vatican decree recognized the federation, which in 1965 became the Fédération Internationale des Universités Catholiques, or the International Federation of Catholic Universities, or IFCU. I think it's more euphonious perhaps than FIUC, which is what it would be in French, with its headquarters in Paris. This is a recognized body in the UN's Registry of International NGOs, and the role of this federation is fivefold. I'm not going to go through all of those, but the first is to promote collective reflection on the mission amongst Catholic higher education. I urge you to go to their terrific website, but without going more deeply into their specific programs, I want to highlight three that indicate their CST-linked resources. First is what they call the Laudato Si Endowment Fund, which supports projects in humanities and social sciences that address Pope Francis's link between the well-being of the poor and global fragility. The second would be their Newman benchmarking framework, which invites institutions to undergo evaluations based on CST principles, among other things, to determine aspects such as environmental responsibility, labor relations, and overall mission consistency. The third would be the African Institution Partnership, which seeks to move beyond a culture of support for Catholic universities in Africa that derives simply on financial aid. There are certainly other resources besides IFCU that foster the sorts of solidarity that overcomes challenges from institutional insularity and unhelpful ersatz solidarity in the differing contexts within which CST is applied by Catholic universities. I'm thinking in particular of the ties that bind institutions with roots in religious congregations. The Jesuits, as in the US, have the largest such international network, yet others exist among Lassallean Christian Brothers, schools, and other religious congregations. The Congregation of Holy Cross, to which I belong, founded in recent years Notre Dame University of Bangladesh, and relationships have developed between NDUB in Dhaka and Notre Dame in Northern Indiana, where I teach. Relationships like this allow the avoidance of the bad buys I noted earlier, because institutions have familiarity with one another, not simply sending outdated books or obsolete computers. A second opportunity that exists now, I think, derives from the growing self-awareness within Catholic higher ed in the US about ways to inculcate CST. As noted already, some CST-linked insights and practices are hard to transfer to other places, yet many aren't. Here are a few of the things I think US Catholic colleges and universities can contribute to global Catholic higher ed with CST relevance. First, professionalized management practices that resist unhelpful bureaucratization that would be at odds with Catholic personalism. I think of James Keenan's encouragement of horizontal accountability in university leadership, for example. Second, the creation of campus cultures shaped by the sacramentality of daily life, where Catholic identity is fostered through architecture, liturgy, meals, and other programming. Third would be the suffusing of professional programs in fields like education, business, medicine, and law with Catholic values. Another would be the preparation of lay people, especially women, for Catholic university leadership. Finally, there'd be ways that high impact practices like service learning can join traditional pedagogies in advancing CST values in education. Of course, to be in a network of global Catholic higher ed means also embracing mutuality about insights from other Catholic schools elsewhere about the way CST operates there. I am mindful, for instance, of the way Catholic institutions elsewhere fostered faith-based resistance to dictatorships and political violence in many places in Latin America and also in the Philippines, as well as in parts of Eastern Europe. Certainly, the inspiring witness of heroic figures has been felt in US Catholic colleges and universities. Yet one wonders about deeper lessons we might learn from our colleagues elsewhere. These might include, for instance, the habits of truth-telling within profoundly dishonest political arenas. Sound familiar? The role of small faith-based groups in resisting oppression, and the place of liturgical action in forging shared consensus in political resistance. I have a fear that US Catholic colleges and universities might need more of these type of insights from CST than we've been accustomed to. Yet I'm heartened to think that partner institutions elsewhere in the world might have wisdom to impart to us. Third and finally, the past year of COVID has prompted all sorts of new connectivity within the world. I think we thus have, that's number 2 there, third. I think we have a renewed opportunity to discover novel ways that constituent groups in Catholic universities develop more lateral ties. These ties ought to consider more purposeful sharing of CST-linked insights, especially student to student. With the help of IFCU, similar national bodies like our own ACC and U, as well as existing networks, surely there's much to be gained about how CST principles like human dignity, subsidiarity, and the right to participate in common life, including on our campuses, can be deepened and might be deepened and expanded by shared reflection. Some concluding thoughts. To think of CST in light of global Catholic higher ed means rejecting a low-level solidarity of physical transfers of stuff and embracing instead the aspiration for abiding instincts that CST should create in us toward appropriate interdependence. The goal is thus a solidarity informed by more than guilt, along with hand-wringing or moralizing judgmentalism that the obvious gulfs among us might prompt. New Catholic universities elsewhere face numerous challenges, not simply lack of resources, but challenges from their national settings, with no obvious parallels in the US, and these create obstacles to their flourishing. Examples include legal requirements for minimum amounts of real estate to achieve a charter, something strategically done to keep people from founding schools, formidable restrictions on religious practices on campus in places where religious freedom isn't respected, challenges to keep electricity and water flowing to campuses, occasionally even the undermining of the value of their degrees by unfriendly government fiats. In many countries, higher education is a very unregulated sector of their economy, and there are many more students eager for it than there are opportunities. It thus represents an easy way to make quick money, so that mushroom schools, so-called, spring up at every level, including in higher ed. And Catholic higher ed is not immune, which is one reason why I think there are such huge disparities between the number of Catholic universities in the world. The US Catholic bishops count almost 1,900, while the Vatican counts about 1,380. So very big differences. In addition, in these places across the world, sometimes Catholic hierarchies can create burdens, so that uncertainties in national laws pertinent to higher ed are matched by church uncertainties, and petty rivalries between bishops create policy changes. And mindful of all that, it is certainly in the interest of Catholics to foster educational pluralism, generally speaking. That is, a diversity of options at every educational level, including higher education. And Catholic universities can be valuable everywhere in advancing educational pluralism. And when CST guides policies and practices, Such places can more and more be part of the advance of justice toward which all of our education ought aspire. So, thank you very much, and I now welcome Tom's remarks.
There's an awful lot there. There's a great deal, and I appreciate the way that you have covered the issues and laid them out as clearly as you have. I guess there were a few sections. I don't have any terribly sort of systematized response, but there were a few things that I was thinking about of it. And one of them that you raised early on as an issue was about the explosion of Catholic institutions. You've raised that throughout it. And I think if I compare that to the United States ecosystem, I wonder personally how to evaluate that multiplicity of small schools. You're right that there are an awful lot of private institutions in the developing world that are taking advantage of people, that are doing things not particularly well. I'm aware in the US, as old at least as Catholic University of America, where everybody said, well, this multiplicity of institutions is a problem. Do the Mercies in Pennsylvania need whatever 5 or 6 Mercy colleges? Or I'm not picking on the Mercies. I had not who's a Mercy. They're beloved to me. But pick your order. The kind of localism of that, was that really helpful? That's been debated for 100 and something years in the United States. Those institutions, though, were founded. There's a certain richness out of those. And I don't know that central planning would have done so good a job. I don't think originally anyone had on the list that Notre Dame should rise up as the central one, let's say. It was going to be Catholic U when they were trying to plan that. So there is a little bit of a way that's kind of letting the market work with institutions I find interesting. So I see problems and help in it. But it is true when I look at the rest of the world, I have particularly seen, and I've said that to you, visited colleges or universities really, where I've seen the library and almost been speechless about what's there or really what's not there. Sets and sets of encyclopedias, no primary sources available that I could tell. So the disparities can be enormous. Maybe someday those will be, some of those will stand out and be regarded very highly. But I also look, even when I look at the smaller colleges in the United States, some of which I work with through Collegium that are really struggling, they fill really important niches in terms of who they educate in the United States. They fill a role that I entirely admire, some of those most struggling ones. And I wouldn't want to lose those. And I suspect for many people in the developing world, they may be, these institutions that we worry about can be a first step up. So I don't know what to do with that, that pluralism and multiplicity. I appreciated your section on bad buys. I almost said bad guys, bad buys. And knowing how much needs to be fixed there, but then really being overwhelmed sometimes. I visit many institutions or many places that ask for help. And then the question of really, how can I be of help really to them without kind of sending stuff? And you're right, sending old books, sending things, the difficulties with that. I don't necessarily know anymore, or when institutions want to establish collaborations, I'm not really sure how to do that. I think if I pull it back, I think a lot of people have honor faculty, so I want faculty to think about maybe what they can do rather than just look at maybe what our presidents can do through IFCU or something. And I have found that one of the ways that's been really helpful through Catholics and Cultures has been to sponsor joint conferences. Now, I might end up doing a lot of the paying, but we're working together and thinking as intellectual equals to produce products that are of interest to both places, that help scholars publish and engage with global scholars that they want. And that's really, I think, a way that maybe we can think a little bit more as faculty about who the faculty are we engage with from institution to institution. On the Journal of Global Catholicism, I learned initially that when I visit places for research, and I might bring along a book that I thought was really interesting about that part of India or wherever. And in one case, I remember bringing the book and I knew I was meeting people who were all thanked in the beginning of the book. And I said, so I'd better read this before. Well, when I brought it, it was a $100 Cambridge Press book. They'd all participated in its production, and none of them had ever seen it or owned it or would ever buy it for their libraries. So mostly people borrowed this book overnight and read it and then gave it back to me. And that made me think in terms of how we publish, how we write, that there's something wrong with the systems that we're a part of. So, I was sure that we would make the journal open access. And right now they're kind of, we're still, for some people in the middle, are open access really is good or not as good, or do they count, or how do they count? And I know there are ways to do open access better, and we try to do that. But I think that thinking about when we make choices about where to publish, who will it be available to, that we can be very deliberate about, and recognizing that the Brill press thing that I'm not picking on particular presses, name the press that we do, is probably not going to make it out there to the rest of the world, even in the places where you would assume they must be able to buy that. So I think that there are ways we can think of as faculty about doing that. And also, as we think about working with faculty, with scholars from other places, we try and get deliberate about helping them publish. And we recognize that we've learned that the American peer review system isn't very friendly to that there are different norms and things, but that it can really make or break a scholar abroad's career to publish something in the United States. Some places it's required to publish outside the country in a reputable journal, but that the peer review processes are usually pretty tough on that because the norms are very different, and American scholars might really dismiss that. So those are maybe two ways to think about as faculty how we can connect. You've talked about sort of lay control and the role of religious. I think, looking at you, I think of the Land O'Lakes conference. So there was a time that all of our institutions were much more tightly controlled by religious. And when I see Jesuits coming to the United States, the Holy Cross, the College of the Holy Cross, they are often really quite amazed at what's happened because of lay leadership in our institutions and the donation that goes on and some of the models that they do want to emulate, the local fundraising, but they're also kind of scared of it. And I think there are reasons to be fearful of it. There are ways that it can provide transparency. We think of in our countries. In other places, there's a fear that too much lay ownership is merely an opportunity for corruption, for someone else to take over. So I know that it gets complicated there. And I know that our trustee models that we have in the US can make very neoliberal institutions, which from a Catholic social thought position, we may not all want all of our institutions to be run by multimillionaires and billionaires, though I am very happy like you when they're generous to us. I think another way that they contribute to us, and I want people to think about, is I've been very conscious about thinking about how a lot of our institutions are persistently white in the US, and how when our students think of what Catholic means, if they conjure up an image, it's somebody Irish or Italian or something. And I think that whatever the inequalities of the engagement that we have, that those are institutions, and the people there and the involvement of them can help us actually reshape correctly who and what the church is worldwide, so that there can be things that we get back from those engagements that don't reinforce the idea that Catholic equals white, which we have built ourselves into in the United States. And also, I think that they can help us recognize that there's a notion here, a self-reinforcing notion, that the university is a secular institution, inherently secular. And when I go to institutions in other parts of the world, it varies, but generally speaking, there's more of an acceptance of a kind of a Catholic mission, much more deeply interwoven, and it can show us some other possibilities, where I think in the US, we tend to get sort of stuck in maybe the one ideal model. So that may be too many comments for once. I don't know if you have any thoughts, or you want to open it up to Q&A?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. I'm glad to welcome some Q&A. If people have questions, I'm glad to answer them. I can respond to some of the things you said too, but first I think it makes sense to hear from some others maybe. Should I field them myself, or?
You're welcome to do that if you see them.
Okay.
People can drop in the chat if they want to be anonymous.
You can raise your hand or just start talking maybe. It's nice to see some friends here. Well, while you're thinking, I'll just sort of say one thing. One thing, Tom, about the worry about bad buys, I had a part developing what might be good buys. And that was kind of prompted by something that I heard the other day from a UN linked guy who's talked about the sustainable development goals that have been advanced. And they talked about transportation support in a lot of educational settings where that's a challenge for for students. And the comment wasn't directed to higher ed, but it made me think about the fact that a whole lot of the university students in global Catholic higher ed around the world don't live on their campuses. Very few, actually, and it's not, they don't follow the US model. And so it'd be interesting to think about how one way that some kind of interdependence might be fostered would be thinking about transportation support. Also, the sustainability of connectivity. You know, I don't think it's feasible that they're going to have huge libraries full of books, but they can have sustainable interconnectivity with the right sorts of technical support that's built on relationships that really are forged in knowledge of the context in which that education is being offered.
There's probably a parallel there to how many countries have jumped on the mobile and skipped over the landline sort of thing, that if you reimagine things from a mobile point of view or a connectedness point of view and start there, there's an awful lot you can accomplish. And we have to contribute to making that possible too, with knowledge, not just privatized and held up for pay.
I had a question. First of all, thank you for that bird's eye view. That was remarkable how much you fit into a very short time frame. And thanks, Tom, for your really cogent comments that helped us see even more. I was taken by the vignettes that you offered, and especially the third one. I sent a chill down my spine. The idea of bishops fighting for more control as I assume numbers of religious, especially from founding orders, dwindle. What's left but lay people, and smart, well-educated lay people. And my question was, what do you see the trajectory on that particular issue being, as we seem to get even more divided, not just in the US along left-right lines, but in the global church as well? Do you see that diminishing or getting worse, or just kind of being in stasis?
It's a really good question. My own sense is that the global Anglophone Catholic world and the global Francophone Catholic world and the global Spanish-speaking Catholic world operate very separately from one another in this regard, with different kinds of polarization around a variety of issues. The case I was referring to occurred in an Anglophone country whose church culture in some ways resembles that of the US. And a similar kind of Catholic polarization, to a lesser extent, is true in that country. But my guess is that I'm in favor of pluralism in the church, and I think victory goes to the organized. And I've been very impressed at the way conservative Catholics in this country have organized themselves. You know, they run all sorts of things like Collegium, and they have journals, and they have summer workshops for people in graduate school. And many of my Notre Dame students participate in these things. So that I think those who want a church that's more like the church that doesn't follow that model, we need to be thinking about how to mobilize and organize to and foster a shared sense of identity and a mission focus that's, like, for instance, around CST. You know, I've been very I've noted very carefully the way you can sort of decide what kind of a Catholic someone is, whether their most important thing they care about is religious liberty or social justice in this country. Now, that's a very disturbing reality in some level, but I think it's sort of true. If religious liberty mobilizes you, you're going to have a certain set of, we could flesh out a whole lot of opinions you've got. And if social justice mobilizes you, we can flesh out a whole lot of a set of opinions you've got. This isn't new. And maybe on January 6th, we saw its apotheosis, or Maybe it's, I hope, death, but I don't know. You know, a lot of those people were chanting religious liberty. That was a big rallying cry for those people.
Mhm.
So,
Sobering, but thank you.
yeah.
I was thinking, I'm a social scientist by training, and a lot of the kinds of examples that you gave and the thing, you know, you looked at structures, you looked at context, you looked at all the things I'd like to look at. And part of it in the background, I was thinking, say, of ex corde, and to touch on the way that you talked about the United States, you stayed away a little bit from how, I don't know, the history of ideas or something like that, or theology, if you will, as an abstraction, has impacted all of this. I mean, is there anything more to say along those lines in it? I wouldn't, certainly Excorde, or has Excorde impacted that? It certainly impacted the United States over the last 20 years, less than the last 10.
Yeah, you know, it'd be interesting to look at ex corde through the lens of CST, and I've never really done it, I must admit. I've thought about it more about how it affects Catholic faculty and theology departments like my own, because we are asked whether we want to pursue the mandatum, et cetera. I think we still are when we're hired. I'm not sure. I was asked when I was hired, and happily no one's ever asked me since, and I don't want them to, and I'm not going to confess anything here. So, but you know, it's one of those circumstances. I don't know if new faculty that come to our department, if they're Catholic, they're asked to pursue it or not.
I was thinking of it certainly in terms of Episcopal control as one of the ways that it's come to be played out. So whatever big ideas were in it, it got filtered down in the American conversation to that question of Episcopal control. And I don't know if that's what's driving some of those bishops you're talking about elsewhere to want to take more control, or.
It's a great question. I do think the case I brought up, the third anecdote, does reflect those kinds of concerns. Yeah, for sure. As far as I know about it.
Hi, Father Paul. It's Andrea Whistler.
Andrea, nice to see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea at Georgetown University. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry I joined a few minutes late. I was picking up my child from hybrid Catholic schooling and bringing him home. So I joined a few minutes late, but I'm also the social scientist and usually not the numbers person, but the difference of the Catholic institutions in the world and then what the Vatican says are the Catholic higher ed institutions really struck me. I think it was like 600 in
About 500 difference, yeah.
I'm sorry if I missed it. What are the like different criteria? What is making that big difference? I mean, and I'm thinking this because I mean, one reason I wanted to hear you speak and see you, but I'm interested in this topic because we do a research fellowship. I have 4 students every summer who in an education and social justice research fellowship, and they go to typically Jesuit, but also just generally Catholic institutions around the world to really explore and research what that institution is doing around social justice. And it just made me think, my gosh, like we think we're going to Catholic institutions, but maybe we're not according to the Vatican. So I'm just curious, what is the difference?
Well, I don't know. My guess is the Vatican has standards that are more stringent for that designation than the Catholic bishops, or maybe vice versa. I don't know. It's hard to get a list. When you go online, you can find lists of some Catholic universities in some countries, but a comprehensive list I've never seen. You probably have to go to the Vatican dicastery to get that information. Yeah, I do think there's the phenomenon of these kind of mushroom Catholic schools in certain countries, so that a wealthy Catholic individual can start a university and slap the name Catholic on it. Now, his local bishop or her local, it's almost always him, his local bishop may approve that. Does that therefore make it a Catholic university? I don't know. It might have 4 faculty members and like 1 building and 75 students. So that, for me, that's the reason for the discrepancy between the 2 numbers. My guess is you don't send your students to those places.
Probably not. Yeah. But when you were talking about that and the mushrooming, it made me think of And I should know this about Notre Dame being a graduate, but I don't. But like Georgetown has a campus in Doha, right, in Qatar, which is a different type of mushrooming. I know because it has this kind of parent institution, and it came to my mind because I had a Zoom call a couple weeks ago with colleagues at our Doha campus because we were changing the wordage of some of our Jesuit values that we have on banners around our campus, and it was a really interesting conversation with that context. Anyway, it made me think, the mushrooming conversation made me think of that too. I don't know if other Catholic schools like Notre Dame have that kind of satellite campus like that.
Certainly a number do. USF has a campus in Santa Rosa, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
I just am aware of that. There'd be other examples, I'm sure.
Mhm.
The Australian Catholic University has about 6 campuses, I think, in Australia, a far-flung country.
Mhm.
And Notre Dame University of Australia has a number of campuses as well.
Okay.
So that may be one of the reasons for the discrepancy between the numbers too. They may
Right.
just be counting different. I'm not sure.
Okay.
My guess, it's due to the mushrooming phenomenon. That's my guess.
My guess, I was wondering, I had written some years ago about Catholic colleges, the history of Catholic colleges and universities, and I was trying to count them in the early years. And what got counted as a college might have been a high school
Yeah.
with 5 women, so the boundaries were really fluid. And I think for a lot of these, whether they're theologates that grow, kind of which they are, remains an open question too. But any concluding thought you have?
Well, I'm just really grateful for people to be here. And I did try to pack a lot in. I hope I didn't speak too quickly. I did try to kind of argue from points. So I'm glad to get any comments you have to email me at Notre Dame. It's just P. Kollman, as my name is spelled on the screen, at nd.edu. I'd love recommendations, suggestions about the paper, which I'll be revising soon in order to send it to the editors. So I do welcome comments or questions or concerns that you had. Don't hesitate to share them. I'd appreciate them. So, and I thank again Tom and Collegium and all of you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been really interesting. So